All right. So we have finished our dodge layers, which brightened everything up, but it did give us the areas of brightness that we saw. Now we have to do a burn layer. So we're going to do the exact same thing. Make a new blank layer, fill it, edit fill with 50% gray. Just try a normal mode. And then change it to overlay. But now this time we are going to use the burn tool. Just like the dodge tool, the same sort of settings apply. You want a nice soft brush so you don't get hard edge lines showing where you're doing it. Light is soft at the edges when you're processing, either in a dark room, and so it should be here. You want your exposure to be less than 30. The smaller it is, the slower the change, the more control you'll have, but the longer it will take. You want to start with the midtones, and you want to start with a size that, with your stylus, that's generally large enough to cover a big area, and then you just use less pressure to do less. Now let's do my dry run. I did it with yellow for the highlights, just using the painting tools. So now I'm going to use the complement. Let's use a deep purple to show where I want the shadows to be. So I want the shadows to be, let's make that a deeper purple so it shows up a little bit better. I want the shadows to be strengthened on my jaw here, underneath my chin, certainly. Venus de Milo has a much stronger chin than I do. On the back side of my neck, all down my chest here, especially the front of my chest, all that needs to get burned down. So this isn't about getting an even exposure, this is about matching the dramatic lighting. A little bit darker on the back side of my nose, the shadow side of my nose. Maybe a little bit here on this brow line and ear. Maybe a little bit on the inside of the nose there. And then a lot on the pedestal and on the shadow underneath it. So it looks like, and under the arms, it looks like there's a shadow there. A lot on the front of the neck too. So there's what I need to burn. I don't see a whole lot, maybe the upper lip a little bit. So that's what I'll call my burning script. And I like to do that so I can look back at it and see if I've hit all the areas I identified. Okay, now let's put it into practice. I go to my overlay layer. I'm using the burn tool, which looks like a hand cupped into a circle. Doing it at 10%. The first place, my ear and my jaw. Burning it down. Now notice when you burn, it takes saturation away. Or it gives the illusion of taking saturation away. And so you also have to use the sponge tool. If you burn a lot, dramatically, you have to use the sponge tool to accommodate for that. Now notice, because I'm on midtones, when I get to the really brightest part of my neck, which I want to darken, I actually will need to switch to burning the highlights. And I don't usually recommend that because it's dangerous. But that's the only way I'm going to be able to really change this. And if it goes beyond 50% gray, I have to do it to my actual copy layer underneath. I'm going to do it very gently and a lower exposure because it's very strong when you burn highlights. So generally I like to keep it at midtones. And yeah, it brings my Adam's apple out a lot. That's not really my intention. I'll show you how I fix that later. So I'm doing as much as I can on this overlay layer. So I'm going to call this my burn overlay. But when I need to, I'll go down to my layer copy. And that's where I'm going to adjust with the sponge tool as well to get some color back into it. See, and then the chest. I can do most of that here. pretty dramatic changes here. Is there anything else? See how I'm doing with this background, this pedestal? I can burn the pedestal as well, certain areas. Help me give me that shadow. This is all just with the burning tool. And again, I am not painting. I'm just bringing out the exposure that's already there. Then on that pedestal layer, because you can affect the pixels directly with the dodge and burn tool too. I can burn out the side, but in this case, better to just use that soft eraser. I'm going to be softening these edges anyway. Let that background show through a little bit. Okay. So, what have we fixed so far? We fixed the formatting, and now with dodging, burning, and sponge, at least somewhat, I think I need a little bit more sponging to desaturate right here. And then where the burn tool took away so much color, I need a little bit of sponging to saturate right here to get some of that color back. Now we get into retouching. And I have some videos in PhotoBucket for you on this as well. Retouching is when you get rid of like problem areas and you replace. So for this, I can turn off my dodge and burn layers. I can even turn off my background. This is just a regular exposure now that's been dodged and burned a little bit. And what I'm going to do is use this next set of tools above the brush and the clone stamp. And the retouch specific tools are under what's called the healing patch here. And probably the easiest to use is called the spot healing brush. You pick a brush, much like we've done, and then you're going to fill it with content aware. So if you have something that's weird on your face, like little pimples, little ingrown hairs, you simply hit them and it will sample around that area and make them disappear by filling it in with the texture around. So it's still filling it in with texture and with content from your exposures. But let's zoom in, like a freckle. This little freckle I have, super easy to just hit that and it will blend it in perfectly with the surrounding skin. So again, it's not like painting on top of it, or dry lips. So it's a pretty powerful retouch tool. You can see why people overuse it and end up getting rid of all texture in their skin. All pores disappear eventually. This used to be called airbrushing because before you had digital photography, you would actually take your photographic exposures and you would airbrush over the top of them with a light dusting of skin color. And so that isn't as strong as this is, because this is actually moving the exposures around. I don't know why that's staying there. But this does take quite a bit of processing. So every once in a while you still want to save your exposure. And if there's anything that's just distracting you, like this shadow under my lip, I can just use that spot healing brush and wipe it out. If I didn't want a button on my shirt, I mean, it's pretty amazing how well these content-aware algorithms work now. I can just paint out the button. Because who needs buttons anymore? And it will fill it in with content from your exposure, trying to match edges, even try to match shadows. And you can just kind of keep whittling away at it until it works. Now there are times when it does not work well, right? And it's too obvious. With complex textures like teeth, if I want to smooth out the crack in my tooth there, it's going to make it look like I have a little puddle on my tooth. Right? That's just because that's too complicated a texture for it to match well in a way that our eye won't recognize. So instead, we have to go to some of the more complex tools. The patch tool is just like the spot healing brush, except you can grab a whole section of texture. So let's say the complex texture of this tooth, and then move it over to make it bright like this section, right? But here, let me show you how that works. So I select an area, I use the patch tool, and then I select this texture to map into that tooth. And that gets rid of the crack in my tooth seamlessly. You should feel drunk with power right now. Or for instance, this really complicated reflection in my glasses, right? I could take that, draw around it with the patch tool, and then simply map it with this texture right next to it, and it will do a lot to reduce it. Of course, the edges are a little bit wiggy. But what looks better? You know, that or that? So now I have slightly strange edges from that selection process. So how do I fix that? Well, now we go to the good old clone stamp. This is the ultimate retouching tool. And this has been in Photoshop for a long time. With this tool, I can pick up pixels from one part of the exposure and paint them onto a part of the other exposure by copying them. So if I use a brush that's very soft, always a good idea when you're retouching, not too large because I'm going to do a small area here, and I do an opacity that's pretty low, basically what I'm going to do is hold down Option to target the area I want to steal pixels from, and then I just paint them right over the area where I need some adjustment. And I can match it. Problem is, it makes it look like my skin stretched now over my glasses. So you can work on it and then realize you don't want any of that, and then you just go back to the beginning. But that's the power you have. So my eyes are always bloodshot, so if I wanted to retouch that, like a little redness there, I could use clone stamp, select here, and slowly paint in kind of the lighter texture. Or I could just use the spot healing brush and just help smooth some of that out, as long as the texture isn't too complicated. All right. So I'm not actually too worried about all my freckles and stuff. I have a lot of stray hairs. But if that bothers you for your portrait, because I'm trying to match this, I don't need to worry about these details. But these retouching tools might be necessary for you to work with, to erase stray hairs. You can just use the spot healing brush. And then when you get to a big textural area like that, you can use the patch tool. And just grab a section that's close to it, and it will map the two together.